Welcome to World War II News with your newscasters, Nicole O'Brien, Ella Harmon, Portia Magliona, and Cami Nickel.
News around the world. This evening's topics: daily life, rationing, education, and casualties in World War II.
Tonight we will be focusing on Germany, the Soviet Union, Japan, and Britain.
Nicole, what is life like for those living on the home front?
Well, Ella, if you're not directly fighting in the war, civilians were heavily impacted by war efforts. Civilians are now living in fear of being attacked by their enemies in their own homes.
Wow, that sounds dreadful. Though not all countries were living in fear. A strong example of well-prepared civilians during this time of the war is the Soviet Union. They have previously experienced shortages and economic crisis in World War I, so they are more prepared for the difficulties of World War II.
But Germany has a different story. Much of Germany's daily life was influenced by Hitler, who was very concerned with maintaining German civilian consumption levels. Many people are often taken from their homes and forced to work in labor camps. Children go to school in the Hitler Youth, and many young women are involved in war work or assisting in facilities like hospitals.
And in Japan, like in many other countries engaged during the war, women work the factories helping produce military supplies. Due to the shortage of supplies and food, the idea of rationing comes into play. For more information, let's hear what Cami and Portia have to say.
Ready? Go. Many people across the world have turned to rationing during the war. Rationing is the act of putting a restriction or limit on the amount of food that each person is allowed to have. The idea of rationing began in the late 1930s. To control rationing, people were required to use ration cards, which are similar to coupons.
To buy most rationed items, a family had to register at chosen shops and were provided a ration book containing these coupons. In the Soviet Union, rationing was implemented in 1941. The first ration goods were bread, flour, cereal, pasta, butter, margarine, vegetable oil, meat, fish, sugar, and confectionery. Peasants are not allowed to have any rations and had to make do with local resources.
In Germany, rationing began in 1939. Men that are involved in heavy industry are given extra rations, while Jews are given very little rations. Rationing is similar in Britain, but they count on the color of rationing books to determine the amount of food that each person should be given. The colors are mostly based on if you're an adult, child, or pregnant woman.
In Japan, there are two types of rations, A and B. The A ration normally consists of 30.7 ounces of rice, 5.3 ounces of fish or meat, and a small amount of seasoning and flavoring. The B ration normally consists of 24.4 ounces of hard biscuits in 3 paper bags, which is enough for 3 meals, 2.1 ounces of meat or fish, and a small amount of seasoning like salt and sugar.
Rationing is necessary in many countries in order to save money and cope with the shortages of food. Now let's turn it over to Nicole and Ella so we can learn more about education.
Though it seems that children did not play a large role in World War II, they were directly affected by the efforts of the war.
For elementary schools, high schools, and universities, the war affects enrollment, the availability of teachers and professors, lessons taught, curriculum, and extracurricular activities.
Math, science, and history weren't the only basic lessons children were taught in schools. They were taught about the meaning of the war and the role their country played in the war. Germany was one of the countries that supported these teachings.
In Germany, indoctrination and the use of propaganda are a highly stressed practice in the Nazi schools.
But all teachers had to be careful about their wording when teaching children about these dangerous topics. The children were encouraged to inform authorities if a teacher had said something they did not agree with. The Nazis' curriculum was enforced by Hitler.
The sole purpose of this educational structure is to create a future generation that is loyal to Hitler and the Nazis. In Britain, things were done a bit differently since the government had made plans for evacuation of all children from Britain's large cities. The country was divided into 3 areas: evacuation, neutral, and reception, which is where the evacuees would be sent, including teachers and some students. But since many evacuees were not students, too many children were left without education. Those who remained in school had to share the teaching buildings with other evacuees, resulting in the double shift system, which involved children using the classrooms in the morning and the evacuees were taught in the afternoon.
Japan's form of education was more similar to Great Britain's. Children moved with their teachers, double shifting of teachers in classrooms was used, and children living in urban areas had to move to more rural areas for their education. Like most other countries, the Soviet Union's government was in control of their educational system. Let's meet up with Portia and Cami for more information on the outcome of the war and casualties.
Cami, I'm so glad that the war ended last week.
I know, me too.
Let's take a look at some of the statistics of the war.
Britain had a total of 450,900 casualties. 383,800 of them were soldiers, leaving the other 67,100 losses to be civilian deaths.
The Soviet Union lost a total of 26.6 million people overall, with 8.7 military deaths by the end of the war.
Germany ended up with 3.5 million killed and 4.6 million wounded. 1.1 million of the civilian deaths were due to military activity and crimes against humanity, controlled by Hitler. There were 400,000 to 2.4 million civilian deaths due to war-related famine and disease.
By the end of the war, Japan had suffered 2 million casualties, the Battle of Okinawa alone resulting in 80,000 to 150,000 civilian deaths.
The amount of civilians and soldiers sacrificed during this war did not compare to the number of others wounded or severely injured that later lost their life.
Okay, ready? Overall, World War II had a large impact on not only those who were fighting in the war, but the civilians at home who were in fear of what was going to come next.
World War II was a big awakening for the soldiers, countries fighting in the war, and civilians being targeted in their own homes. This was a whole new playing field compared to World War I.
We are lucky that this war has come to an end and hope to have peace in the near future.
Thanks for watching World War II News at 6. Tune in next week to hear about the end effects of the war and how Reconstruction can work its way into rebuilding the affected countries.
This has been a nightly news report by Cami Nickel,
Nicole O'Brien,
Ella Harmon,
and Portia Magliana.
see you next week.
Bye!